She pressed a jagged piece of broken glass against her own palm and held it up in the darkness. 9 years old. Shaking so hard her teeth rattled. But her voice never wavered. "You come one step closer, and I'll scream this whole county awake." Behind her, a small boy, barely breathing, burning with fever. Jack Turner hadn't moved in 30 seconds. He was looking at that glass. He was looking at her eyes. And something inside him, something he'd buried 7 years ago alongside his wife and daughter, cracked open like dry wood in a winter storm. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Jack Turner had not spoken to another living soul in 11 days. That was not unusual. There were stretches out on the Turner property where the only sounds were wind against the fence posts, the creak of the old windmill, and the low complaints of horses that had grown as solitary and suspicious as their owner. The ranch hands had stopped coming 2 years ago. The neighbors had stopped checking in the year before that. And Jack had decided somewhere along the way that the silence was not something to endure, but something to lean into the way a man leans into a cold wind, because fighting it only wears him out faster. He was 41 years old and looked older. His hands were scarred at the knuckles and permanently dark at the creases from years of fence wire and leather and diesel. His jaw was the kind that hadn't seen a razor in going on 3 weeks. He walked with a slight pull in his left hip from a horse wreck 6 years back, and he wore his hat low out of habit rather than style. There was nothing romantic about Jack Turner. He was just a man who had outlasted everything that mattered to him, and hadn't yet figured out why. He had come back to the barn that Wednesday evening to check on his mare, a chestnut quarter horse named Ruth, who had been favoring her right front leg since Monday. The heat had been punishing all week that dry Wyoming August that felt like the sky itself was pressing down on your shoulders, and Jack moved through it the way he moved through everything. Now slow, deliberate, not in any particular hurry to get anywhere, because there was nowhere he especially wanted to be. He pushed open the barn door and the hinges gave their usual complaint, and he stood for a moment letting his eyes adjust from the pale evening light outside to the deeper shadow inside. He could hear Ruth shifting in her stall. He could smell hay and dry wood, and the faint iron and salt smell that old barns carry no matter how well you keep them. He took 3 steps inside, and then he heard it. Breathing. Not Ruth's breathing, he knew that sound well enough. This was smaller, faster. The kind of breathing a person does when they are trying very hard not to breathe at all. Jack went still. He did not call out. He did not reach for anything. He simply stood there in the half-dark and let his eyes move slowly across the barn, across the hay stacked against the far wall, across the shadows pooled deep in the back corners, until he saw the shape that didn't belong. 2 shapes, small ones, tucked tight into the hay pile in the far left corner, one pressed against the other. He took 1 step toward them. "Don't." The voice hit him like a thrown stone, flat, hard, certain. "Don't you come 1 step closer." Jack stopped. He could see her now. A girl. Slight as a willow switch with dark hair matted to her face, and clothes that had been through something serious, torn at the knee, stiff with dried mud at the hem. She was standing in front of the other shape, the smaller one, her arms spread wide like she could cover him with just her body. And she was holding something up in her right hand. A piece of glass. Thick and jagged, the kind that comes from a broken jar or a shattered window, and she had it pointed outward, her knuckles pale around it. "You come any closer," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that 9-year-old voices have no business being, "and I'll scream so loud they'll hear me in town. And when they come, I'll tell them you kept us here against our will. I'll tell them anything I have to." Jack looked at the glass. He looked at her eyes. He put both hands up open, and he took 1 slow step backward. "All right," he said. She blinked. She had not expected that. "All right," he said again, quieter. "I'm stepping back. See?" He moved back another step until his shoulders were almost at the barn door. He lowered his hands slowly, palm still out. I'm not coming any closer. I promise you that. Your promises don't mean anything to me. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly, and he could see it cost her something to show that the way she pulled her chin up right after compensating. Fair enough, Jack said. They don't have to. A long silence. The wind moved outside, and the barn timbers shifted slightly, settling the way they did at dusk. Ruth made a low sound in her stall and stamped once. Is that your horse? The girl asked. She hadn't lowered the glass. That's Ruth, Jack said. She won't bother you. She sounds big. She is. She's gentle, though. He paused. My name's Jack Turner. This is my property. I know. The girl's jaw tightened. We weren't stealing anything. We just needed somewhere to sleep. I can see that. He kept his voice flat and quiet, the same tone he used with spooked horses. The voice that said, I am not a threat, and I am not leaving, and you can take all the time you need. How long have you been here? She hesitated. 2 nights. 2 nights in his barn, and he hadn't known. He pushed that thought aside. Just the 2 of you. Yes. How old's your brother? Another hesitation, longer this time, like she was deciding how much to give him. 6. He's sick. The question landed on her, and he watched her face do something complicated, the struggle between needing to deny it and needing help so badly she could barely stand. The glass in her hand trembled once. He's fine, she said. Jack looked past her at the small shape in the hay. Even in the dim light, he could see the flush of fever on the boy's face. He could see the shallow, too fast rise and fall of his chest. Miss, he said carefully, I can see he's running a fever. He's fine, she said again harder. He doesn't look fine to me. You don't know anything about him. Her voice rose and she caught it, pulled it back down, and that control, that iron will working in a child that age, hit Jack somewhere behind his sternum like a slow punch. You don't know anything about either of us. You're right, he said. I don't. He looked at her steadily. But I've got water inside, and I've got aspirin, and I've got food that was made this morning, and I'm not going to force any of it on you. I'm just going to leave it. He tilted his head toward the barn entrance. Right here, at the door, and I'm going to go back to the house, and you can do whatever you want with it. She stared at him. That's it, she said. That's it. You're not going to call the police. The word hung there between them like something dangerous. Jack held her gaze and answered it honestly. Not tonight. She searched his face for the lie. He let her search. Why not? Because your brother needs water and aspirin more than he needs a squad car showing up, Jack said. And because you've been sleeping in my barn for 2 nights and you haven't taken a single thing. That tells me something. What does it tell you? Tells me you're not trouble, he said. Tells me you're trying not to be. Her chin was trembling now, just barely, and she was fighting it with everything she had. The glass was still up, but her arm was shaking with exhaustion. He could see it now, the way it had been shaking since he first saw her, not from fear alone, but from pure physical depletion. She had been standing guard over that boy for a long time. He did not know how long. He suspected longer than 2 nights. I'll be right back, he said. He turned and walked to the house. He did not look back over his shoulder because that would have communicated distrust, and the only currency he had right now was the fact that he had done exactly what he said he would do. He went inside. He filled a large canteen with cold water from the tap. He found the aspirin in the bathroom cabinet and shook out 4 tablets and put them in a small paper cup. He cut 4 thick slices of bread and laid them on a plate alongside a wedge of cheese and the last of the cold chicken from Sunday. He put everything in a paper grocery sack and walked back out to the barn. He stopped at the threshold. He set the bag down on the ground just inside the door. He straightened up and looked at her. She had not moved. The glass was still in her hand, but lower now, angled toward the floor rather than his chest. Water, aspirin, food, he said. If he gets worse, Fever gets higher, he stops responding. You come knock on the back door of the house. I don't care what time it is. She said nothing. Jack nodded once, turned around, and walked back to the house. He sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, in the chair by the window that faced the barn, and he did not turn on the light. He sat in the dark with his hands on the table, and thought about things he had not let himself think about in years. The weight of a small child. The particular silence of a house without one. The sound a little girl makes when she is trying not to cry, and is very nearly succeeding. He did not sleep much that night. In the morning, the paper sack was empty. Both tablets were gone from the cup. The canteen had been drained and set back neatly just inside the door. Jack refilled the canteen without comment and added a bar of soap and a clean washcloth and left them in the same spot. He went about his work. He did not enter the barn unless he had to check on Ruth, and when he did, he made noise approaching Boots on the wooden step, a two-note whistle he'd always used to signal his horses so that they heard him coming and had time to prepare. He spoke to Ruth in the same low-running commentary he always did, talking about nothing about the fence line he needed to check and the weather coming in from the northwest, just sound and presence without demand. On the second day when he came in to water, Ruth, the girl, was sitting on the floor near the back stall with her back against the wall. Her brother was asleep beside her head in her lap, and she had one hand resting on his hair. She looked up when Jack came in, but she didn't move, and she didn't reach for the glass which he could see tucked behind her right knee within easy reach. He nodded at her. He went to Ruth. He checked the leg, ran his hand down the tendon, spoke quietly to the horse. He did not look at the girl directly, but he was aware of her the entire time, aware of the way her shoulders had come down slightly from where they'd been, up around her ears the day before. When he finished with Ruth, he straightened up and addressed the middle distance, not her face directly. Fever come down any? A pause. Some. He keep the aspirin down. Yes. Good. He picked up the empty water bucket. I was going to make eggs and biscuits this morning. Made more than I can eat. He looked at her, then just briefly, and looked away again. I'll leave a plate. She didn't respond. He left the plate. It was empty by noon. On the third day, the boy woke up. Jack was in the far stall when it happened. He heard the child's voice, thin and rough from fever, but undeniably alive, saying, Emma, Emma, where are we? And he heard the girl's voice lower and softer than he'd heard it yet, saying, We're okay, Ethan. We're safe. Go back to sleep. Jack stood very still with his hand on Ruth's neck and breathed. He had not heard anyone call anyone by name in this barn since his daughter was 4 years old, and had followed him in to watch him shoe the horses, and had talked the entire time, a continuous bright stream of words calling him Daddy, in that particular way she had high at the beginning and falling off at the end. Daddy, 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 like a song she'd made up just for him. He pressed his forehead against Ruth's neck for a moment and breathed. Then he picked up the bucket and went about his work. That afternoon he was sitting on the porch steps working a broken bridle strap when he heard the barn door open. He didn't look up immediately. He gave her time to decide whether she was approaching or retreating. Slow footsteps on the dry ground, stopping about 10 feet away. He looked up. She was standing in the full sun, squinting slightly, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd washed her face. He could see that the dried mud was gone from her cheeks, and her hair had been pulled back roughly with something. She looked older in the daylight than he'd been picturing her in the dark of the barn, and much younger. His fever's mostly gone, she said. I'm glad to hear it. She looked at the bridle in his hands. What happened to it? Buckle gave out, cheap hardware. He held it up briefly, showed her the break. Got to replace the whole strap. She nodded like that made sense to her. She stood there another moment, not moving, and he could see her working up to something the way her jaw moved slightly before she spoke. We're not going back, she said. He looked at her. To wherever you came from, he asked. To the home. Her voice changed on the word, hardened and hollowed at the same time the way a word does when it means the opposite of what it should. The Briar Creek Children's Home, in Kerrville, Texas. She said the name like it tasted bad. We're not going back there. I don't care what happens. We are not going back. Jack set the bridle strap down on the step beside him. "All right," he said. She frowned. "That's all you're going to say?" "What would you like me to say?" "Most adults say that's not your decision, young lady." Her voice went flat and mimicking on the last part, and something about the accuracy of the imitation made his chest tighten. "Is it not your decision?" he asked. "It's my brother," she said, and her voice broke open on the last word, just for a second, raw and furious, and then she sealed it back up again with an almost visible effort. "He is 6 years old, and he has been sick 3 times since January. And every time I try to get someone at the home to take him to a doctor, Mr. Cole says we're wasting county money. He said Ethan was fine. He said I was being dramatic." She stopped. Her hands were fists at her sides. "He wasn't fine. He's never been fine. And I am not dramatic. I know what I see." "I believe you," Jack said. She looked at him with something close to suspicion. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I've been watching you for 3 days, and I know what I see too." She stood there in the sun and looked at him, and he looked back, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "He hurts them," she said finally quietly, like saying it too loud might bring it down on her. "Not always the same way. Sometimes it's taking things. Sometimes it's the dark room. Sometimes it's just the way he looks at you when he says your name, like you're something he owns." Her jaw tightened. "He told me if I made trouble, he'd make sure Ethan got sent to a different placement, one where I couldn't see him." She looked away out across the flat, dry land stretching away from the porch. "I shut up for 8 months because of that. 8 months." She said it like a confession, like something shameful. "Emma," Jack said. She looked at him sharp and startled, like she'd forgotten she'd told him her name. "What you did," he said carefully. "Keeping yourself quiet that long, to protect your brother, that wasn't weakness. That was the hardest kind of brave there is." Her face did something then that he didn't think she meant to let him see. Something young and unguarded moved across it, and her eyes went bright for just a second before she blinked it back. "I ran when I had a chance," she said. "There was a delivery truck. The driver left the back gate open. Ethan was already sick again, and I thought—" She stopped. "I thought I had to go then, before Cole noticed, before it got worse." "How long have you been on the road?" 9 days. 9 days. A 9-year-old girl and a feverish 6-year-old boy. 9 days of Texas and Oklahoma, and the long flat edge of Colorado before the Wyoming border. 9 days of however they'd managed it, hitched rides, walked at night, hid in daylight. Jack looked at his hands. "Are you hungry right now?" he asked. She blinked at the change of subject. "I'm always hungry." "Come inside," he said. "Both of you. I'll make something that isn't bread and cheese." She didn't move immediately. He didn't push. He stood up, tucked the bridle under his arm, and walked to the door and opened it, and went inside and left it open behind him. He heard her footsteps on the porch 2 minutes later. He heard a smaller, slower pair of footsteps just behind hers. He was already at the stove, and he didn't turn around, just kept his back to the door and his hands busy, because she didn't need to be looked at right now. She needed to walk into a room without having to brace herself against someone's eyes. "There's a table," he said. "Sit wherever you want." A chair scraped. Then another smaller sound, a child being lifted onto a seat, or climbing himself, he couldn't tell. "What's your name?" Ethan's voice, still raspy from the fever, directed apparently at Jack's back. "Jack? Do you have a TV?" "I do." "Does it get cartoons?" "Saturday mornings," Jack said. "I believe it does." A pause. Then, with the perfect logic of a 6-year-old, "Is it Saturday here? Thursday?" "Oh." A beat. "That's okay." Jack turned around with 2 plates in his hands and set them on the table. He looked at Ethan for the first time in full light, and the boy looked back at him with big dark eyes that still had the faint shadow of fever under them, but were curious and direct. He was small for 6, thin in the way that came from insufficient food rather than natural build, and his hair was a disaster, and he had a bruise on his left forearm that was old enough to be yellowing at the edges. Jack looked at that bruise for 1 second and then looked at his own boots. He went back to the counter and made himself a plate and brought it to the table and sat down. "Emma said you're a cowboy," Ethan said. "Retired," Jack said. "What does that mean?" "Means I used to do more of it than I do now." Ethan considered this seriously. "Do you have a gun?" "Ethan." Emma's voice low and warning. "It's all right," Jack said. "Yes, I have a rifle, for coyotes." He looked at the boy. "It's locked up." Ethan nodded, apparently satisfied. He picked up his fork and looked at the plate and then looked up at Jack with an expression of concentrated focus. "This is a lot of food," he said. "You can eat as much as you want," Jack said. Ethan looked at his sister. Emma was looking at Jack, and her face had that complicated, warring expression. He was beginning to recognize the one that sat between needing to trust and being too smart to do it quickly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at her brother and said quietly, "Go ahead." Ethan ate like a 6-year-old who had been afraid of going hungry for a long time. Not fast, not grabbing, but carefully, like he was paying attention to every bite. Emma ate the same way, precise and deliberate, watching the room even while she did it. Jack ate and said nothing, and let the silence be what it was. Not comfortable, yet not uncomfortable either. Just an honest silence between people who didn't know each other and were not pretending otherwise. After a while, Ethan said, "Are we staying here?" Emma's fork paused. Jack looked at the table. "That's up to your sister," he said. Ethan looked at Emma. Emma looked at Jack. Something passed between them, a question on her part, an answer on his in the language people use when they have moved past words but are not yet ready to trust them anyway. "We'll see," Emma said. Ethan accepted that the way children accept hard truths with a small nod and a return to his food, trusting the person he loved most to navigate the world on his behalf. Jack picked up his fork. Outside, the wind had died down. The windmill turned slowly in whatever small breath of air was left. The evening light was going amber and long across the floorboards, and the kitchen, which had not had voices in it in 7 years, held 3 people eating in silence, and the silence was not the same as it had been before. It was not empty. That was the difference. Jack Turner noticed that, and he set it aside carefully, the way you set down something fragile when you aren't sure yet if it's yours to hold. Emma did not sleep that night. Jack knew because he didn't sleep either, and sometime around 2 in the morning, he heard the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. One, then a pause, then another, the careful movement of someone checking perimeters. He lay still and listened to her make her circuit through the house, testing windows, testing the back door, stopping for a long moment outside the room where Ethan was sleeping in the spare bed, and then returning to the room he'd given her and going quiet again. He stared at the ceiling and thought, she's been doing that for months, maybe longer, making those rounds, checking every exit before she let herself rest. He didn't say anything about it in the morning. He made coffee and oatmeal and cut up the last apple from the bowl on the counter. And when Emma came into the kitchen, she was fully dressed with her shoes on, and she looked at him with those watchful dark eyes like she was still deciding something, and he turned back to the stove and let her decide. "Ethan's still asleep," she said. "Let him sleep." She sat down. She watched him move around the kitchen for a moment, and then she said, "You didn't lock the doors last night." "No," he said. "Why not?" He set a bowl in front of her and looked at her. "Because I didn't want you to feel locked in." She looked at the oatmeal. She looked at him. She picked up the spoon. That was the 4th morning. By the 5th morning, Ethan had decided that Jack was the most interesting person he had ever encountered, which Jack suspected had more to do with the horses and the tool wall in the barn than with any personal quality. The boy followed him at a careful distance through the morning chores, asking questions in a continuous low murmur. "What's that for? Why does she do that? What happens if you don't? Can I hold it?" And Jack answered each one honestly and let him hold the things that weren't dangerous. Emma watched from the barn door with her arms crossed. Jack handed Ethan a curry brush and showed him where Ruth liked to be groomed, high on the neck behind the ears, and the boy went at it with focused, serious effort, and the horse lowered her head and blew out a long, satisfied breath. "She likes me," Ethan said, astonished. "She does," Jack agreed. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said from the doorway, "He's never been around animals." "I can tell," Jack said. "He's good with her. She won't bite him. Ruth." Jack glanced at the mare. "She hasn't bitten anyone in 8 years, and the one time she did, the man deserved it." Emma almost smiled. It was the smallest possible version of a smile, more of a flicker, like light under a closed door. But he saw it. He didn't comment on it. He was learning her the way you learn any creature that has been hurt slowly with your peripheral vision, never head on. That afternoon, a truck came up the drive. It was his neighbor Dale Hutchins, a heavy-set man in his 60s who ran cattle 2 properties over and who came by occasionally to borrow equipment or complain about the county water board. Jack was on the porch when the truck pulled up, and he stood and felt the shift happen in the house behind him. A door going quiet, a presence going very still, and he walked down the porch steps to meet Dale before Dale could get to the door. "Jack!" Dale tipped his hat back. His eyes moved past Jack to the house and then back. "Heard you might have some company." "Word travels," Jack said. "Small county." Dale hooked his thumbs in his belt. He was not an unkind man, but he was the kind of man who didn't like unusual things, who preferred the world to stay in its expected shapes. "People have been talking. Said they saw a girl and a boy at your gate yesterday." "People are observant," Jack said. Dale looked at him steadily. "Jack, you know I gotta ask." "They're fine," Jack said. "They needed help. They got family. Not that they want to get back to." Dale was quiet for a moment. He was working through something. Jack could see it the way decent people work through things when they know the right answer isn't the easy one. "Jack, if there are kids on your property with no guardian and no documentation, you could be looking at trouble, the kind you don't need." "I know. You should call Eleanor Hayes. She runs the county family services office on Tuesdays. She's a reasonable woman." "I know Eleanor." "Then you know she won't come in swinging. She'll listen first." Dale looked at the house again. "How bad is it? Where they came from?" Jack looked at the flat land beyond the fence for a moment. "Bad enough that a 9-year-old girl slept in my barn for 2 nights with a piece of broken glass in her hand rather than risk knocking on a door." Dale was quiet. "All right," he said finally. He pulled his hat back down. "All right, you call Eleanor. Don't wait too long." He looked at Jack with the particular expression older men use when they are trying to say something without saying it. "You were always stubborn, Jack, since you were 20 years old. Just make sure you're being stubborn for the right reasons this time." He got back in his truck and drove off. Jack stood in the drive for a moment, and then he went back inside, and Emma was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her chin up, and she had clearly heard every word. "Who's Eleanor Hayes?" she said. "County Family Services," Jack said. Her face went blank and hard in an instant, the way a face does when it has rehearsed that particular expression many times. "We're not going into the system." "I know. You don't know. You think you know, but you don't know what it's like." "Emma." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. "I'm not calling anyone tonight. I told you I wouldn't move without talking to you first. I meant it." She looked at him. The hardness in her face was still there, but something underneath it was trembling. "People say things like that, and then they do what's convenient for them." "Yes," he said. "They do." He held her gaze. "I haven't yet." She breathed, one controlled breath in and out. "You're going to have to eventually," she said. That's what he meant. That we're a problem you can't just absorb. Or, Jack said, "You're 2 people who needed a safe place, and I have a safe place, and we figure out the legal part of it the right way instead of the fast way." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I'm going to call Eleanor Hayes," he said, "and I'm going to ask her how a person goes about getting emergency guardianship of 2 kids. And you're going to sit at this table and listen to every word of that conversation, and if you don't like where it's going, you tell me, and we stop." The silence stretched between them, and then Ethan appeared in the hallway doorway, in his socks, squinting from his nap, his hair at a spectacular angle. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No," Emma said without taking her eyes off Jack. "Then why do you sound like we're in trouble?" "We're not," she said. Ethan looked at Jack. Jack looked at Ethan. "You hungry?" Jack asked. "Kind of," Ethan admitted. "There's cornbread on the counter," Jack said. "It's from yesterday, but it's fine." Ethan padded to the counter and tore off a piece, and ate it standing up. Apparently unbothered by the tension in the room, or perhaps simply accustomed to navigating around it. Emma watched her brother, and her shoulders came down fractionally, the way they always did when she confirmed he was safe and fed. "Okay," she said quietly, still watching Ethan. "Call her." Jack called Eleanor Hayes the next morning. Eleanor was 63, practical and warm in equal measure, the kind of woman who had worked in family services long enough to recognize genuine need when she heard it in a man's voice, and who had also worked long enough to know that good intentions and legal standing were two entirely separate things. She listened without interrupting while Jack told her as much as he could, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Jack Turner," she said. "I haven't heard from you in going on 6 years." "No, ma'am." "Are these children physically safe right now?" "Yes." "Is the boy getting medical attention?" "Fever broke 3 days ago. He's eating and moving around well." "And the facility they came from, you said Briar Creek Children's Home in Kerrville." "That's what the girl told me." Another pause longer this time, and Jack heard something shift in it. "I'm going to make some calls," Eleanor said carefully. "That name is not unfamiliar to me, Jack. I want to be honest with you about that." Something tightened in his gut. "In what way?" "In the way that names sometimes circulate among people in my profession," she said. "Informally, nothing official, but I have heard that name before." She paused again. "You keep those children where they are. Don't let them leave, and don't let anyone else in until you hear back from me. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "I'll call you by end of day." He hung up the phone and sat there for a moment with his hand still on the receiver. Emma was in the doorway. She had heard. "She knows about Briar Creek," she said. It wasn't a question. "She's heard of it," Jack said. Something complicated moved across Emma's face. Something that was equal parts vindication and a pain so old it had gone quiet. "I told them," she said. "A year ago I wrote a letter. To the county. I didn't know who else to write to. I didn't know the right name." She stopped. Nothing happened. "She said it was informal," Jack said. "That means nothing was proven, yet." "Yet?" Emma repeated like the word was a foreign thing she was trying out. Jack stood up. "Emma, what you told me about the dark room, about the threats, have you ever written any of it down?" She looked at him. "Why?" "Because if this goes where I think it might go," he said, "written testimony from someone who was there is going to matter a great deal. And your memory is the sharpest I've encountered in a person twice your age." She was quiet. Then she said, "I remember everything." "I know," he said. "That's going to count for something." Eleanor Hayes called back at 4:15. Jack took the call in the kitchen with Emma sitting across from him at the table, and he put his hand over the receiver once and said quietly, "She knows you're listening." And Emma nodded and sat straighter in her chair. Eleanor's voice was measured and deliberate. "I spoke to my contact at the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. There is an open inquiry on Briar Creek Children's Home. It has been open for 14 months. She paused. The inquiry stalled because the children who initially raised concerns recanted. Emma's jaw tightened across the table. "My contact says the recantations were obtained in interviews conducted at the facility itself," Eleanor continued, "with the facility director present in the room." A beat. "Are you understanding what I'm telling you, Jack?" "I'm understanding," he said. 2 children from that facility who left without authorization are now in your custody. The facility director, a Mr. Raymond Cole, has the legal right to request their return, and the county sheriff has the legal obligation to respond to that request. Another pause, heavier now. I can file for emergency protective placement within 48 hours, but I need the children's cooperation. I need statements. And Jack, I need you to understand that once I file this becomes official, and Mr. Cole will know where they are. Emma stood up from the table. Jack looked at her. She was not shaking. That was the thing, she had been shaking in some form, in some part of herself since the moment he found her in that barn. And right now, she was absolutely still. Her eyes fixed on the middle distance, her hands flat on the table in front of her. "Tell her we'll give statements," she said. "Both of us." Jack looked at Emma and looked at the phone. "Both children are willing to make statements," he said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, just slightly softened at the edges, in a way that said she was not just a professional right now, but a human being who had been doing this work for 32 years and still felt it. "That took courage," she said. "Tell that little girl that took real courage." Jack looked at Emma. "She heard you," he said. Emma looked at the phone, and then at Jack. And then she sat back down, and Ethan came in from the porch, right then, with his boots still on, which he'd been told not to do, dragging a stick that was entirely too large for the house. And Emma said, "Shoes," automatically, and Ethan said, "They're boots." And Emma said, "Off." And Ethan sat down on the floor and pulled them off without argument, and got back up and continued into the room like nothing had happened. Eleanor said she would be at the ranch by 10 the next morning. Jack said thank you. He hung up the phone. He sat at the kitchen table with Emma across from him, and Ethan making experimental sounds with his stick against various pieces of furniture, and for a moment none of them said anything. Then Emma said very quietly, so that Ethan couldn't hear over his own noise, "What if he comes before she files the paperwork? Cole, he knows we're gone. He's had 9 days. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "He has legal paperwork. I've seen him use it before. He has lawyers, and he has county contacts, and he knows how to make himself look like the reasonable party." She looked at Jack directly, and it was a look he had not seen from her yet, not guarded, not armored, just raw and straight. "He will come, Mr. Turner, and he will have the right documents and the right words, and he will stand right there on your porch and make it sound like taking them is the humane thing." She stopped. "And I need to know if you will hold." The word landed in the room and stayed there. Jack looked at Emma for a long time. He thought about what he'd been for the past 7 years, the shape he'd made of himself in the silence of this house, the long, careful project of feeling nothing, because feeling nothing was the only way to keep upright. He thought about the paper sack he'd left at the barn door, and the empty canteen returned neatly to the same spot. He thought about Ethan's face when Ruth blew out that breath and leaned into the grooming brush. He thought about the bruise yellowing at the edges on a 6-year-old's forearm. "Emma," he said, "I haven't stood up for anything in a long time." He held her gaze. "But I'm telling you right now, Raymond Cole is not setting foot past my door." She looked at him the way people look at a thing they are deciding whether to believe. "Okay," she said. Not easy trust, not blind faith. Just a woman of 9 years making the best calculation available to her with the information she had and deciding it was worth the risk. Ethan knocked something off the counter with his stick and said, "That was already broken," and Emma said, "It was not." And Jack stood up and said, "Both of you." Dinner and the kitchen moved back into its strange, warm noise, and outside the Wyoming evening came down slow and orange and enormous across the land. Jack checked the lock on the front door when he went to bed that night. Not because he was afraid, because for the first time in 7 years, there was something in his house worth locking the door for. Eleanor Hayes arrived at 9:47 the next morning, 13 minutes early, which Jack took as a sign that she had not slept well either. She was a compact woman with silver hair cut short and practical, and she moved up the porch steps with the particular purposeful energy of someone who had spent decades walking into difficult situations and had learned to get there before her nerves caught up. She shook Jack's hand and looked at him with clear gray eyes and said, "You look like you haven't slept." "I look like I always look," he said. "That's what I said." She stepped inside and stopped in the hallway, and her eyes moved to Emma, who was standing at the kitchen table with her arms at her sides and her chin level, wearing the expression she wore when she had decided to do something hard and was making herself do it before she changed her mind. Eleanor looked at Emma for a long moment. Not assessing, not clinical, just looking the way a person looks when they are seeing something real and want to honor it by paying attention. "You must be Emma," she said. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I work for Fremont County Family Services." She said it plainly without softening it or wrapping it in reassurance, and Jack noticed that Emma's shoulders actually relaxed slightly at the directness. She had been lied to by kind voices too many times. A straightforward one was almost a relief. "I'm going to need to ask you some questions today. Some of them are going to be hard. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer, but everything you do tell me is going to help." Eleanor paused. "Is your brother here?" "He's in the back," Emma said. "He doesn't need to be part of this." "No," Eleanor agreed easily. "He doesn't. Not today." Emma looked at Jack. Jack gave her the smallest nod. She pulled out a chair and sat down. For the next 2 hours, Emma talked. Jack stayed in the room but said almost nothing. Eleanor asked questions in a quiet, unhurried voice and wrote in a narrow notebook. And Emma answered in the same steady tone she used for everything, not dramatizing, not minimizing, just stating events in sequence. The way someone states facts when they have rehearsed them inside their own head so many times that the words have worn smooth. The dark room in the east corridor. The way Cole would stand in the doorway and say a child's name until they understood who had the power in that room. The 3 children who had been moved to other facilities after raising complaints relocated within 48 hours before anyone else could speak to them. The boy in Emma's dormitory group who had stopped speaking entirely in the month before Emma left. Eleanor's pen moved steadily. Once Emma stopped mid-sentence and pressed her lips together hard, and the room went very quiet. And Eleanor did not prompt her, and Jack did not move, and after about 10 seconds, Emma said, "Sorry." And Eleanor said, "Don't apologize." And Emma continued. When she finished, Eleanor set her pen down and looked at her. "Emma," she said, "what you just gave me is more detailed and more consistent than anything we have had in 14 months of inquiry. Do you understand what that means?" Emma looked at the table. "It means something might actually happen this time." "Yes," Eleanor said. "It does." Emma nodded once tightly like she was storing that away, somewhere private to look at later when she was alone. That was when the sound of a car on the gravel drive came through the window. Jack was up from his chair before the sound fully registered, moving to the front window, and what he saw was not a county vehicle, and not Dale Hutchins, and not anyone he recognized. It was a dark blue sedan, clean and deliberate, and the man who got out of it wore a collared shirt and pressed trousers and moved with the easy authority of a man who had never in his life had a door close in his face. Raymond Cole was 55 years old and heavy-set, and had the kind of face that smiled without involving the eyes. He stood beside his car for a moment and looked at the house with that smile, and Jack felt something go cold and quiet in his chest. Not fear, something older than fear, something that lived below fear, in the place where a person's most basic decisions get made. "He's here," Jack said. Emma's chair scraped back so fast it hit the wall. Eleanor was already on her feet. "Jack, do not open that door yet." Her voice was sharp and practiced. She was pulling her phone from her pocket. "I need 2 minutes." "You have 1, Jack said. Cole had not knocked yet. He was still on the front path taking his time, and a second man had gotten out of the passenger side, now younger, carrying a folder of papers, the kind of young man who exists to hand folders of papers to men like Cole at exactly the right moment. Eleanor made a call, spoke quickly and quietly listened, said, "File it now," in a voice that allowed no interpretation, and hung up. Emma was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had gone very pale. Not the pale of fear, the pale of fury being held on a very short leash. the white-knuckle pallor of someone who is deciding exactly how they intend to behave in the next 5 minutes. "Emma," Jack said. She looked at him. "Stay inside," he said. "Whatever you hear, stay inside with Eleanor. Can you do that?" Her jaw worked. "He's going to stand there and sound completely reasonable," she said. "He's going to use the right words and the right tone and—" "I know," Jack said. "Let him. I've dealt with reasonable-sounding men before." She looked at him for 1 second longer, measuring, and then she said, "Don't let him manipulate you." And there was a fierceness in it that had nothing naive about it, and Jack thought, she is 9 years old, and she has more clarity about this man than most adults develop in a lifetime. "I won't," he said. And he meant it the same way he had meant "I promise" in the barn 10 days ago, not as a performance but as a statement of fact. He walked to the front door and opened it before Cole could knock. Cole smiled. It was a practiced smile, warm and slightly concerned, the smile of a man who had opened many difficult conversations with it and found it effective. "Mr. Turner," he said. "My name is Raymond Cole. I'm the director of Briar Creek Children's Home in Kerrville, Texas. I believe you may have 2 of our children." "Mr. Cole," Jack said. He did not move from the doorway. Cole waited a beat for Jack to step aside. Jack did not step aside. Cole adjusted smoothly and continued. "I understand there may have been some confusion about Emma and Ethan's situation. These children are under our legal care, and I'm here simply to ensure they're returned safely. It's a matter of their welfare." He tilted his head slightly, the concerned adult gesture. "I'm sure you can appreciate that." "I can appreciate that you drove a long way," Jack said. 600 miles, Cole said. His smile stayed in place. "Because those children matter to us. Emma in particular has had some difficulties adjusting. She has a history of creating narratives around authority figures." A pause precisely waited. "I hope she hasn't caused you any trouble." There it was. The reframe the preemptive discrediting offered in the first 2 minutes. Jack had expected something along these lines. It still landed like a stone. "She hasn't caused me any trouble," Jack said. "I'm very glad to hear that." Cole's assistant shifted the folder slightly, preparing. "We do have the legal documentation for their return, a court order from Kerr County, certified—" "I'm sure you do," Jack said. Cole looked at him with the mild expression of a man recalibrating. He had expected resistance of a different kind, emotional, inarticulate, the kind he could work around by invoking legality and the gravity of official paperwork. He had not expected this particular quality of stillness. "Mr. Turner, I understand you may feel attached to these children. That speaks well of you. But the law is clear, and what's best for Emma and Ethan is to be in a licensed, supervised care environment. Those children are currently under emergency protective placement," Eleanor said from behind Jack. Cole's smile changed. Not much, just at the corners. Just enough for Jack to see that the man behind it was doing rapid calculations. Eleanor stepped forward and stood beside Jack in the doorway. She held up her phone. "I filed the placement order 11 minutes ago. The children are now in the temporary custody of Fremont County, Wyoming, pending review of the existing inquiry into Briar Creek Children's Home by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services." Cole's assistant stopped moving the folder. "That inquiry," Cole said carefully, "was reviewed and closed." "It was paused," Eleanor said. "There's a difference. And as of this morning, it has been formally reopened with new supporting testimony." She looked at him steadily. "I've been doing this work for 32 years, Mr. Cole. I know the difference between a reframed narrative and a documented pattern." Cole looked at Eleanor. He looked at Jack. The warmth in his expression had not disappeared entirely. Men like Cole never let it disappear entirely, but it had gone thinner, stretched over something harder. "I'd like to speak with Emma," he said. "No," Jack said. The word was so flat and final that Cole blinked. "Mr. Turner, no." Jack did not raise his voice. He did not move forward. He simply held the doorway with the full weight of his attention and said, "Emma is not coming to this door. You are not coming into this house. and you are going to get back in your car and drive 600 miles back to Texas, and when the investigators contact you, you're going to answer every question they ask, because that inquiry is open now, and the testimony that reopened it is the most detailed and credible account of what goes on in your facility that anyone has put on record." Cole looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Something that was not anger, not yet, but was the precursor to anger, the moment a man who has operated in a particular way for a long time first understands that the way has closed. "You're making a serious mistake," Cole said quietly. "I've made serious mistakes before," Jack said. "This isn't one of them." Cole held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he looked at Eleanor. "This placement order will be challenged." "It usually is," Eleanor said. "It usually holds." A long silence. The assistant put the folder down at his side, and then Cole turned and walked back to his car. Not fast, not flustered, with all the surface composure intact. But Jack watched the set of his shoulders, and he had worked with enough horses and men to know the difference between a man who had retreated and a man who had withdrawn to reposition, and Raymond Cole was the second kind. The sedan pulled out of the drive and the sound of the gravel faded. Jack stood in the doorway for another 5 seconds, and then he turned around. Emma was right there. She had not stayed in the kitchen. She was standing in the hallway 4 feet behind him, and she had heard every word, and her face was doing something he had not seen from her yet. Something that was not quite relief and not quite victory, but was the expression a person wears when they have been carrying a specific fear for so long that watching it walk away without winning feels too fragile to name. "You told him no," she said. "I did. He's going to come back," she said. "Not him personally, but something. A lawyer or another order or Emma." Jack looked at her steadily. "Let Eleanor handle the next part. That's what she's here for." He paused. "You've been handling things alone for a long time. You don't have to handle this one." Emma looked at him. Her chin was working slightly, that almost imperceptible trembling she did when she was holding something back that wanted very badly to come out. "I wrote the letter," she said. "Last year, to the county. I wrote it in pencil in the dark because I didn't want anyone to see me, and I told them everything, and nothing happened." "Something happened," Eleanor said quietly from behind Jack. "It started an inquiry. It started a file. Those things don't disappear, Emma. They accumulate. What you wrote last year is part of why I could file this morning." Emma looked at Eleanor. "Nobody told me that," she said. "No," Eleanor said. "Nobody told you." There was something in her voice, a contained anger that was professional and old and entirely under control. "That was wrong. You deserve to know." Ethan appeared at the hallway door in his socks, holding a piece of cornbread, looking between the adults with the uncanny social radar of a child who has learned to read rooms very quickly. "Is that man gone?" he asked. "He's gone," Emma said. Ethan looked at Jack. "Did you make him leave?" "Eleanor did," Jack said. Ethan looked at Eleanor with a new and serious attention. "Can you do that again if he comes back?" Eleanor looked at the boy, and for a moment, her professional composure shifted just enough to show the person underneath it, a woman who had spent 32 years making sure children like Ethan existed, in a world where someone said yes when they asked questions like that. "Yes," she said. "I can do that again." Ethan nodded satisfied and took a bite of cornbread. Emma let out a breath that she had been holding. Jack thought for approximately the last 40 minutes. It was not loud. It was barely audible. But it was the sound of a particular weight leaving a body, and it was one of the most real sounds he had ever heard in this house. Eleanor stayed another hour and went through the paperwork with Jack. The emergency placement documents, the timeline of the reinvestigation, the process for formal guardianship review. She spoke to both children briefly and separately. Short conversations in the back of the house that Jack did not intrude on. When she left, she pressed Jack's hand at the door and said, "You did the right thing here." And Jack said, "Emma did the right thing. I just stood in a doorway. Eleanor looked at him the way people look when they know someone is deflecting but choose to let it go. "Call me if anything changes," she said. She looked back at the house once. "Those are good kids, Jack." "I know," he said. He stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down the drive, and behind him, the house was not silent. He could hear Ethan talking to Emma about something, a protracted, increasingly elaborate story about what he would do if he had his own horse, and Emma's voice answering him in the abbreviated, affectionate way she used when she was only half listening, but still fully present, the language of a sibling who can follow the whole map of a conversation without paying attention to every word. Jack stood on the porch for a long time. He thought about Cole's face when the word "no" landed. He thought about Emma standing 4 feet behind him in the hallway when he turned around. He thought about Eleanor's voice saying it started an inquiry, it started a file, and Emma's voice saying, "Nobody told me that," and the particular flatness of that sentence, the absence of self-pity in it, which was somehow the worst part. A 9-year-old girl had written a letter in pencil in the dark and put it in the mail and gone back to surviving and had never been told that it mattered. It had mattered. Jack turned and went back inside. The evening passed in the ordinary, complicated way of a household finding its rhythms. Ethan fell asleep on the couch watching the news at 7:30, which was not cartoons, but was apparently acceptable. Emma did the dishes without being asked, moving around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing adult tasks since before she was ready for them, and Jack dried them and put them away. They worked in silence for a while, and then Emma said without looking up from the sink, "Thank you." Jack set a plate on the shelf. "You don't have to thank me." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." She handed him the last cup. "There's a difference." He took it. He looked at the side of her face for a moment. "You're going to be all right, Emma," he said. "I don't say things I don't mean." She didn't respond immediately. She pulled the drain plug and dried her hands on the dish towel and folded it and set it on the counter. Then she said quietly, "Cole's not finished." Jack looked at her. Her eyes were still on the folded towel. "He doesn't lose things without trying to get them back. I've watched him for 2 years. He's going to find another angle." She looked up then, and her face had that clear, unguarded quality again, not afraid, just awake, fully awake, in the way that children who have survived certain things are always awake. "When he does, I need to be ready." "We'll be ready," Jack said. She looked at him. "We," he said again quietly. "Not you alone. Not anymore." Emma held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once and said, "Okay," and picked up the dish towel again to rehang it, and the conversation closed, the way important conversations sometimes close quietly and completely, with no more fanfare than the sound of a towel being straightened on a hook. Outside, the Wyoming night had come down full and dark and wide, the kind of dark that presses close against windows. And somewhere on the county road, a vehicle passed its headlights, sweeping briefly across the ceiling of the front room where Ethan was sleeping. The lights moved on. The dark returned. And in the kitchen, the last 2 people awake in the house stood in the quiet, and both knew without saying it that Raymond Cole's careful retreat had been exactly what Jack said. It was a withdrawal, not a surrender. The next move was coming. The question was only what shape it would take. Cole's next move came on a Thursday, and it did not look like Cole at all. It looked like a woman named Sandra Pruitt from the Kerr County District Attorney's Office, and she called Eleanor Hayes at 8 in the morning with a voice that was cordial and precise and carried underneath it the particular quality of someone who has been asked to make a problem go away quietly. Eleanor called Jack 11 minutes later. "She's requesting an emergency family court hearing," Eleanor said. Kerr County jurisdiction. Cole's attorney filed a motion arguing that the Wyoming emergency placement is procedurally invalid because the children were registered residents of a Texas facility at the time of placement. Jack was standing in the kitchen. Emma was at the table eating toast, and she had gone still the moment the phone rang, the way she always did. The alertness of an animal that had learned that phones ringing early meant something shifting in the world. "Is it valid?" Jack asked. "The motion. It has a surface argument. Eleanor said carefully. Enough to get a hearing. The hearing is set for Monday. That's 4 days. Yes. In Texas. Yes. A pause. Jack, I have to be honest with you. Cole has deep connections in Kerr County. The inquiry is federal now, which limits what he can do directly. But a family court judge in Kerrville, who has known Raymond Cole for 15 years, is a different situation than a federal investigator. Jack looked at Emma across the table. She was looking back at him, and she had stopped chewing. What do we need? He asked. An attorney, Eleanor said. A good one licensed in Texas, willing to file a counter motion before Monday. And testimony. Not written statements, Jack. In-person testimony. From Emma. In that courtroom. The silence lasted 3 seconds. I'll ask her, Jack said. He hung up and looked at Emma, and Emma said, before he could speak, Texas. Yes. He wants us back in his state. Her voice was flat and controlled. In his county. In front of a judge he knows. Eleanor says the inquiry is federal now. Cole can't touch the investigation. Cole doesn't need to touch the investigation. Emma set her toast down. He needs to touch the judge. He needs to touch the courtroom. He needs me to walk into a room where all the power is arranged around him, and he can look at me across a table and remind me that the last time I talked to authority, nothing happened. She looked at Jack directly. That's the point. That's what this is. Jack pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I know. And you're still going to ask me to go? No, he said. I'm going to tell you what Eleanor told me. And then you're going to decide. Emma looked at him for a long time. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, and Ethan was still asleep down the hall, and the house was quiet enough that Jack could hear both of them breathing. If I don't go, she said, what happens? The hearing proceeds without us. A Kerr County judge reviews Cole's motion with no counter-testimony on record. Eleanor says the placement could be reversed. Emma absorbed that. And if I go, we get an attorney. You testify. Eleanor and the federal investigators coordinate. Cole has to face everything you say in open court instead of having it summarized in a file he can distance himself from. Jack kept his voice level. It's not safe, and it's not easy, and I'm not going to tell you otherwise. But I'll be in that courtroom. So will Eleanor. You will not be standing there alone. Emma looked at the table. She looked at her hands. He's counting on me being afraid, she said. Yes. He's been counting on that for 2 years. Yes, Jack said. And it worked until it didn't. Something moved across her face, not a smile. Something harder than a smile. Something that had been forged rather than grown. She looked up. Get the attorney, she said. The attorney's name was Patricia Voss, and Eleanor found her by noon. She was 47, based in San Antonio, and she had spent the better part of her career doing exactly this kind of work: family advocacy against institutional care facilities, with the particular combination of meticulous documentation and complete impatience for legal theater that the work required. She called Jack that afternoon, asked him 14 direct questions, interrupted him twice when his answers ran long, and said at the end, "The federal inquiry is our anchor. Everything we do in that courtroom has to attach to it. This judge will not openly defy a federal investigation. Cole knows that too, which means this hearing is about optics and intimidation, not legal substance. My job is to make sure the optics go the wrong way for him." Emma is 9 years old, Jack said. I know, Patricia said. I've worked with younger. She'll need prep. Can you have her in San Antonio by Saturday? Jack looked at Emma, who was sitting across the table listening with her hands folded. Emma nodded. Yes, Jack said. They drove to San Antonio on Friday. Jack and Emma and Ethan in Jack's truck, 12 hours with one stop, and Ethan slept most of the way and talked the rest of it. And Emma sat in the front seat and watched the country change through the window from Wyoming's dry open distance to the Texas hill country's rolling cedar green. And she did not say much, but she was not closed off either. She was the way she got before hard things gathered quiet, running through whatever she ran through when she was preparing herself for something. Around hour 8, Ethan said from the back seat. "Emma, are we going to live in Wyoming forever?" Emma glanced at Jack. Jack kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know yet," Emma said. "I want to," Ethan said. "Because of Ruth." "Ruth is a horse, Ethan." "I know she's a horse." A pause. "She's my horse, though." "She's not your horse." "She acts like my horse." Emma looked at Jack again. He said without expression, "He's not wrong. She's been ignoring me since he started grooming her." Ethan made a sound of profound satisfaction and went back to sleep. And Emma turned to the window again, and Jack heard her make a very small sound that might have been a laugh quickly covered. He did not comment on it. He filed it away carefully, the same way he filed away all the small sounds this house had produced in the last 2 weeks, things that needed to be stored gently, not handled too much. Patricia Voss met them at a mid-range hotel in San Antonio and spent 3 hours with Emma on Saturday morning, and Jack waited in the lobby with Ethan and a deck of cards someone had left on the table. And they played a slow and not very competitive game of war, while down the hall, Emma was being walked through what courtroom testimony meant and how to answer questions she didn't know the answer to, and what to do when Cole's attorney tried to reframe what she was saying. Ethan slapped a card down and said without looking up, "Is Emma going to be okay?" "Yes," Jack said. "You always say that." "I always mean it." Ethan looked up at him with those dark eyes that saw more than a 6-year-old had any business seeing. "You didn't know us 2 weeks ago," he said, "and now you drive 12 hours for us." Jack looked at the cards. "Sometimes that's how it works." "How what works?" "People," Jack said. "How people find each other." Ethan thought about this with visible seriousness. Then he slapped down another card and said, "That's mine." And the conversation ended the way conversations with Ethan always ended, completely without residue, the way only children can close a door. Patricia emerged with Emma at noon, and the expression on Emma's face was the one she wore when she had done something exhausting and knew it had been necessary. Patricia looked at Jack and gave him a single nod that meant, "She's ready," and also meant, "She's something." The hearing was Monday at 10. Sunday night in the hotel room, Emma could not sleep again. Jack heard her moving at 2 in the morning, not the circuit checking of the first night in the ranch house, but something different. Restless, compressed the movement of a person who is too tired to stay awake and too wound up to sleep. He knocked on the connecting door, 2 quiet knocks, and said, "You decent?" "Yes," she said. He opened the door. She was sitting on the bed with her knees up and her back against the headboard, and the lamp on, at its lowest setting. "You should sleep," he said. "I know." She looked at her hands. "I keep thinking about what he's going to say." "Cole. His attorney." She picked at the hem of the bedspread. "She's going to say I have a history of narratives. That's the word they use. Like what I saw wasn't real, it was just a story I made up because I have trouble with authority." Her voice was level but thin at the edges. "She's going to say it in a way that sounds concerned about me, like they're the ones protecting me from my own unreliable mind." Jack leaned in the doorway. "And what does Patricia say?" "Patricia says I just answer what's asked and let her handle the framing." Emma looked up. "But I've been in rooms where the framing was everything, where the words were all on his side and mine were just noise." "Emma." Jack crossed to the chair by the window and sat down low and unhurried so she didn't have to look up at him. "Do you know what Cole doesn't have that you do?" She waited. "A federal investigation file with 14 months of accumulated evidence," he said. "And Patricia Voss. And Eleanor Hayes filing supporting testimony from Wyoming. And the 3 other children who were relocated after they complained because Eleanor's contacts found 2 of them last week, and they are now speaking to investigators." He held her gaze. "Cole is walking into that courtroom with a local judge and a surface motion and a strategy built on the assumption that you would be too frightened to show up. You showed up. His whole architecture assumes a version of you that doesn't exist anymore." Emma was quiet. "The version that stayed quiet for 8 months, she said. "That version kept your brother alive," Jack said. Don't talk about her like she was a failure. She was doing what she had to do with what she had. He paused. Now you have more. Use it. Emma looked at him for a long time in the low lamplight. Then she said in a voice that was tired, but not defeated, "Why did you leave the barn door open that night?" He looked at her. "Which night?" "The first night. After you left the bag, you left the barn door open. Not all the way. Just enough." She held his gaze. "If you'd closed it, I'd have felt trapped. I would have run before morning. I know I would have." A pause. "You left it open." Jack thought back to that night. He had not made a conscious decision about the barn door. He had simply walked away and not closed it behind him, the same way he hadn't locked the house the first night, operating on some instinct that had less to do with strategy than with a kind of basic decency he had not been called upon to use in a very long time. "Didn't think about it much," he said. "I know," Emma said. "That's why it mattered." She pulled her knees tighter. "People who are performing kindness think about every gesture. You just left the door open." Jack did not have anything to add to that. He sat with it for a moment. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow matters." "I know." "Emma?" He stood up. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever that attorney says, however the judge looks at you, you already did the hardest part. You got yourself out. You kept Ethan alive. You walked into a stranger's barn and held your position until you figured out whether it was safe." He looked at her steadily. "That was all you. No one helped you with that part." She didn't respond immediately. She was looking at the lamp. Then quietly, "You helped with the aspirin." He almost smiled. It was the first time he'd come close to one in longer than he could remember. "Go to sleep," he said, and she said okay. And he went back through the connecting door and pulled it almost shut. He heard her lamp click off 2 minutes later. The courtroom was smaller than Jack expected, wood-paneled and warm, and carrying the particular weight of a room where a great many people had sat and waited for decisions that changed their lives. Judge Catherine Morales was 60 and deliberate, with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had heard a great deal and been surprised by very little. She was not the judge Cole had presumably hoped for. His preferred judge, Jack learned from Patricia that morning, had recused himself 48 hours earlier, after Eleanor's office sent a formal notice of the federal investigation scope. That had been Patricia's first move. Jack had not known about it until that morning. He looked at Patricia with new appreciation, and she said without looking up from her papers, "I told you, optics." Cole was already seated at his table when they came in, his attorney beside him, and he looked at Jack with the expression of a man who has made a careful decision to appear untroubled. He did not look at Emma. That was deliberate too. Jack thought the non-look of a man who has decided that acknowledging her presence gives her too much weight. Emma walked to her seat with her chin level and her hands steady, and she did not look at Cole either. She sat down next to Patricia and put her hands flat on the table, the same way she had the morning Eleanor came to the ranch, the gesture Jack had come to recognize as her version of planting her feet. The hearing opened, and Cole's attorney made her motion with the expected competence, procedural arguments, jurisdictional language. The surface case assembled neatly. She used the word vulnerable twice in reference to Emma, the practiced vocabulary of someone redefining the person they were targeting as someone who needed protection from herself. Patricia objected to the characterization, and the judge sustained it, and something in Cole's attorney's composure shifted almost imperceptibly. Then Patricia called Emma. Emma stood up and walked to the stand and looked at the judge and not at Cole, and the bailiff swore her in, and Patricia said, "Emma, in your own words, can you tell the court why you left Briar Creek Children's Home?" And Emma told them. She spoke for 22 minutes. She did not embellish. She did not perform. She did not give Cole's attorney the emotional volatility she needed to re-invoke the word narrative. She stated events in sequence, named dates where she knew them, said clearly when she didn't know something, and answered every attempt at cross-examination with the same deliberate accuracy she had used with Eleanor at the kitchen table 3 weeks ago. The voice of someone who has lived with these facts every day for 2 years and has no need to exaggerate them. Twice the judge looked over her glasses at Cole. Once Cole looked at Emma, and Emma looked back at him, and the look lasted exactly as long as Emma chose to hold it before she turned back to the judge. And what Jack saw in Cole's face in that second was something he recognized, the expression of a man who has just understood that the leverage he built his entire strategy on no longer exists. The judge did not rule immediately. She asked 3 questions of her own, each one precise and pointed in a direction that suggested she had read the federal inquiry documents before entering the room. Then she called a 20-minute recess. Jack sat next to Emma in the hallway and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was better than silence, and Emma sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight and looked at the middle distance and breathed. After 15 minutes, she said, "He kept looking at me. I know. Like he was waiting for me to fall apart. I know. I didn't." "No," Jack said. "You didn't." She looked at him sidelong just briefly and then back at the middle distance. "The other kids," she said. "The ones Eleanor's people found. Are they okay?" "I don't know yet," Jack said honestly. "But they're talking. That matters." She nodded. When they went back into the courtroom, Judge Morales looked at both tables with the even attention of someone who has already made up her mind and is choosing her words carefully. She denied Cole's motion in its entirety. She referenced the ongoing federal investigation, the procedural validity of the Wyoming emergency placement, and in language that made Cole's attorney go very still, noted that the testimony presented indicated patterns consistent with systemic institutional misconduct that warranted full cooperation from all parties with federal investigators. She looked at Cole directly when she said that last part. Cole looked at the table. The judge also noted for the record that the testimony of the minor witness demonstrated exceptional clarity and consistency, and that the court found her account credible in all substantive particulars. Jack heard Emma exhale, the same sound she had made in the kitchen after Cole drove away the sound of a specific weight, leaving a specific body. The relief that comes not from the end of everything, but from the confirmation that the ground is still there. Patricia gathered her papers. She leaned over and said something quietly to Emma that Jack couldn't hear. Emma listened, and then she nodded once, the same tight, definitive nod she used when she had decided to accept something true. They walked out of the courtroom into the Texas afternoon, and Ethan was in the hallway where Jack had left him with the hotel concierge's business card and a promise, and he ran to Emma immediately and said, "Did we win?" And Emma put her hand on his hair and said, "We won today." And Ethan said, "Is that enough?" And Emma looked at Jack over her brother's head. Jack looked back at her. "It's enough for today," she said. They drove back to Wyoming on a Tuesday, and the truck was quieter than the drive down. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the compressed, coiled silence of people bracing for something, but the loose, bone-tired quiet of people who have been through the thing they were bracing for, and are still upright on the other side. Ethan slept for 4 hours straight and woke up somewhere in the New Mexico high desert, asking if Ruth missed him, and Emma said she was sure Ruth was fine. And Ethan said that wasn't what he asked. And Emma said yes, she probably missed him, and Ethan accepted that, and ate the crackers from the gas station bag, and went back to sleep. Emma did not sleep. She watched the country change back through the window south to North Texas, giving way to New Mexico, giving way to Colorado's long approach. And Jack let her watch, and said nothing, because he had learned by now that Emma processed things by looking at the distance, and the distance was best encountered without commentary. Around hour 9, she said without turning from the window, "What happens to the guardianship review?" "Eleanor files the full petition this week," Jack said. "The hearing is in 6 weeks. And if the court says no, then Eleanor files again," Jack said. "Patricia says we have standing and we have documentation, and we have the fact that Cole's motion just got denied on the record by a Texas judge. We're in a better position than we were a week ago." "That's not the same as a yes." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Emma was quiet for a moment. "You could lose the house," she said. "If this gets complicated legally, attorneys cost money and—" "Emma." I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate. You're a single man on a working ranch, and you've had 2 extra people in your house for 3 weeks, and you just drove 1,200 miles round trip and paid for 3 nights in a hotel and... Emma. His voice was patient and final. Stop accounting. She stopped. She looked at her hands. I've been accounting for everything since I was 7 years old, she said quietly. It's the only way I knew how to stay safe. If I knew the numbers, I knew what was coming. I know, Jack said, and that skill kept you and your brother alive. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm just telling you that in this particular situation, the numbers are my problem, not yours. She turned and looked at him for a long moment, and he could feel it without looking. The weight of her trying to figure out how to hold something being offered when the instinct was always to keep both hands busy holding things yourself. Okay, she said finally. Just that. And she turned back to the window. They were home by midnight. Ethan woke up when the gravel drive crunched under the tires and said, Ruth, before he said anything else, and Emma told him the barn was closed and he could see the horse in the morning, and he accepted that with the heavy pragmatism of someone too tired to argue and let Jack carry him inside. Jack settled Ethan in the spare bed and came back to the kitchen, and Emma was already making coffee, moving around the kitchen, in the easy, automatic way she had developed over 3 weeks. And the sight of it, a child who had arrived like a fist in the dark, now moving through his kitchen, like she knew where everything lived, did something in his chest that he did not examine closely. He sat down at the table. She set a mug in front of him. It's late, he said. You should sleep. In a minute. She sat down across from him with her own mug and held it in both hands and looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. What did your daughter's name? The question landed without warning, and Jack was quiet for 3 full seconds. Clara, he said. Emma nodded, absorbing that. Eleanor told me, she said. She didn't mean to. She said something about you and the ranch, and she said you'd been through loss. She didn't give details. Clara and her mother, Jack said. Car accident, 7 years ago. He said it the way he always said it when he had to say it flat and factual, because the flat factual version was the only one that didn't take him somewhere he couldn't get back from quickly. Clara was 4. Emma held her mug. I'm sorry, she said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that why you live out here by yourself? Partly. And the other part? Jack looked at his coffee. After something like that, the world outside gets very loud. People say the right things, but they're all watching you for signs of how you're doing, and you get tired of being looked at like a thing that might break. He turned the mug in his hands. Out here it was just quiet. I thought I needed quiet. And now? Emma asked. He looked at her. Now the quiet seems like it was mostly just absence, dressed up as peace. Emma held his gaze. I used to pretend that being vigilant was the same as being safe, she said. At Briar Creek. If I stayed awake long enough, watched close enough, stayed ready, nothing could catch me off guard. It caught me off guard anyway, plenty of times. But I kept doing it because the watching was the only thing I could control. Sounds familiar, Jack said. People do the same things, Emma said. Different circumstances. Jack looked at this 9-year-old across his kitchen table and thought not for the first time that she was an old soul, in the specific way that people become old souls, not through any particular gift, but through having been required to understand things too early. Get some sleep, he said. We've got a lot of normal days ahead of us. Might as well start getting used to them. She almost smiled. Is that what normal days feel like? I'll let you know when I remember, he said. She took her mug and went down the hall, and Jack sat at the table alone for a while, and the house made its small settling sounds around him, and it was late, and he was tired. But the tiredness felt different than it had for 7 years. Not the gray, flat exhaustion of a man running on empty toward nothing in particular, but the specific weight of a day that had required something real of him. He slept. 3 weeks later, Eleanor filed the full guardianship petition. The response from Cole's legal team arrived 4 days after that, and it was as Patricia had predicted, a document designed not to win, but to delay procedural objections, supplementary motions, a request for psychological evaluation of both children. This last item written in language so clinically neutral that it took a moment to understand it was a challenge to Emma's credibility dressed in professional courtesy. Jack called Patricia. Patricia said, "Expected. Already counterfiled. Don't react." Jack called Eleanor. Eleanor said, "The federal investigators made their first formal request for Cole's internal records yesterday. He's fighting on 2 fronts now. Anything he does to complicate your petition is visible to federal investigators as potential obstruction. He knows that. This is noise." Emma read the documents. She read them with the same careful attention she brought to everything sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while Ethan was outside with Ruth in the paddock, where Jack had started letting the boy spend his mornings. And when she finished, she set them down and sat quietly for a moment. "He's trying to make me sound unstable," she said. "He's trying to delay," Jack said. "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him. "The delay is the tactic," Jack said. "The character question is the instrument. Patricia says the psychological evaluation request will be denied because there is no evidence basis for it. It's a motion, not a finding." Emma looked at the papers again. "He put in here that I have a documented history of making accusations against authority figures." She pressed her finger on the line. "Documented, like there's a file somewhere full of incidents." "Is there?" Jack asked, because he needed to know. "There's a file full of things Cole wrote about me," she said. "After I wrote the letter to the county. Every time I asked questions or pushed back, he documented it. He was building a record." She looked up. He knew even then. He was already preparing for the possibility that I'd be believed someday. The room was very quiet. "Emma," Jack said, "did you keep anything? Any record of your own letters notes? Anything?" She looked at him. "I burned a notebook before we left. I was afraid he'd find it and use it against me." Jack nodded slowly. "But I remember everything that was in it," she said. "Then we write it down again," he said. "All of it. Everything you remember. Patricia can have it entered as a contemporaneous account." Emma looked at him. A 9-year-old's handwritten notebook versus the documented records of a licensed facility director. A 9-year-old who has already demonstrated under cross-examination in a Texas courtroom that her memory and her account are credible in all substantive particulars, Jack said, repeating the judge's language back to her deliberately. She blinked. "You memorized that," she said. "I write down things that matter," he said. "Get a notebook." She got a notebook. She wrote for 6 days mornings at the kitchen table after breakfast, with the kind of quiet, focused intensity that produced 3 to 5 pages each session. Not storytelling, not dramatizing, just the methodical reconstruction of a record that someone had tried to ensure she couldn't keep. Dates, descriptions, names, exact words when she had them, approximate words when she didn't, and always the notation. "I cannot confirm the date, but I know this occurred before or after," showing the specific honesty of someone who understands the difference between what they know and what they don't know and refuses to blur the line. Jack read none of it without her permission. She offered it once, and he read it, and he handed it back without saying much, because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate, and because she did not need him to validate what was in it. She needed him to receive it, and those were different things. Ethan, entirely unaware of most of this, was having what he would later describe as the best weeks of his life. He had developed a relationship with Ruth that bordered on devotional. He learned to clean her hooves with patient coaching from Jack, and did it with the concentration of a surgeon. He started getting up before Emma in the mornings, which had never in his life been true of him, in order to get to the barn first and check on her. He named 2 of the fence posts. He fell off the lowest paddock rail twice and bounced both times and considered it a fair trade for the view. He asked Jack on a Tuesday afternoon while they were checking the east fence line. "Were you always a cowboy?" "Started when I was about 16, Jack said. "That's old." Ethan said. Is it? I've been a cowboy for almost 3 weeks already, Ethan said entirely seriously. Jack looked at the boy. You have, he said. You have been. Ethan looked deeply satisfied with this assessment and continued along the fence line, and Jack watched him go. Small boots, too big hat that Emma had found in the mudroom and jammed on his head that morning. The walk of a 6-year-old who had recently decided who he was, and the tightness in Jack's chest that had become familiar in the last weeks rearranged itself into something he could not name but did not try to push away. The guardianship hearing was set for a Friday in October. The night before, Cole did the thing that none of them had fully anticipated. Not a legal move, something smaller and more direct. He called Patricia's office and left a message, and the message said simply that he was prepared to withdraw his legal opposition to the emergency placement and consent to a 12-month temporary guardianship review in exchange for Emma withdrawing her testimony from the federal investigation. Patricia called Jack at 7 in the evening. She read the message twice. Then she said, "He is asking a 9-year-old child to be silent in exchange for being allowed to stay in a safe home. I want you to understand what we are looking at." Jack understood exactly what they were looking at. He told Emma. She sat at the kitchen table and listened and did not move for a long moment. Ethan was in the back room. The house was quiet. Outside, a wind had come up, the kind of wind that precedes Wyoming's early autumn, and the window panes were registering it in a low, irregular tremor. Emma looked at Jack. "He's scared?" she said. "Yes. He's never been scared before." She said it without satisfaction, just the factual acknowledgement of a shift in the landscape. He used to be completely sure. You could feel it, the certainty that nothing would stick, that every door was open to him and every door was closed to the rest of us. She looked at her hands. Now he's trying to make a deal. "It's not a deal," Jack said. "It's a test. He wants to know if you can be bought, if your silence has a price." Emma was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Tell Patricia no." "Emma, tell her no." Her voice was steady and clear. The voice she used when something had been decided and did not need to be revisited. "My testimony is not a bargaining chip. Those other kids, the ones who recanted in that room with him standing there, they had no one in the hall waiting for them. No attorney, no Eleanor, no Jack." She looked up. "I do. And that means I don't have an excuse to be quiet." Jack looked at her for a long time. "You know what this means," he said. "It means the investigation goes further and takes longer, and Cole will keep fighting on every legal front available to him, and this is not over tomorrow, even if the hearing goes our way. I know. You're 9 years old. I know that too." She met his eyes. "But those kids are still in there, or somewhere like there. And if I trade my testimony for a comfortable outcome for myself, I am Cole. I am exactly what he taught me to do." Her jaw set. "I'm not doing that." Jack called Patricia. Patricia said without any discernible surprise, "Good, I'll have the formal refusal filed by morning." And Jack, the federal investigator, called today. They found a 3rd child who has agreed to give testimony. Cole is running out of road. The hearing the next morning lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. Eleanor testified. Patricia presented the full documentation package. Emma's reconstructed notebook included submitted as a contemporaneous witness account. The counter-filing against Cole's psychological evaluation request was addressed and denied by the judge within the first 30 minutes. Patricia presented the formal refusal of Cole's settlement offer as additional evidence of the pattern, the systematic attempt to suppress witness testimony, and the judge added it to the record without comment, though the expression on her face was not difficult to read. Cole's attorney made her motions. They landed differently than they had in Texas. A Wyoming family court judge, without 15 years of Cole's acquaintance, looked at the documentation with the fresh eyes of someone seeing the pattern whole, not in isolated pieces, and what she saw was apparently sufficient. The judge granted temporary guardianship to Jack Turner valid for 12 months, subject to quarterly review. She also issued a formal recommendation to the federal investigation entered into the court record, stating that the testimony presented indicated a sustained pattern of witness intimidation, and that the court found the minor witnesses in this case credible, and their accounts internally consistent and supported by documentary evidence. Patricia collected her papers. Eleanor shook Jack's hand. The bailiff opened the door, and the hallway was there, and in the hallway were two children, Ethan in his boots, that Emma kept telling him not to wear indoors, currently sitting on a wooden bench, swinging his feet, and Emma standing 6 feet away with her arms crossed and her chin level watching the courtroom door. When Jack came through the door, Emma looked at him, and he looked at her. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. Emma closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were bright, and she blinked it back the way she always did. The practiced compression of emotion that she had been doing since long before she should have needed to learn it. Ethan jumped off the bench. "Can we go home now?" "Yes," Jack said. "We can go home." Ethan looked at Emma. Emma looked at Ethan. She reached out and straightened the collar of his jacket. A small automatic gesture. The gesture of someone who has been looking after another person for so long it lives in her hands without instruction. "Come on," she said. They drove home on a Friday afternoon with the light going long and golden across the Wyoming country, and the first cold edge of autumn in the air, and Ethan talked about what he was going to tell Ruth. And Emma listened with her head against the window, and her eyes half open, and Jack drove and said nothing, and felt the miles go by. When they pulled into the gravel drive, and the house came into sight, the old wood of it, the windmill turning slow, Ruth's head already up and watching from the paddock fence. Ethan was out of the truck before it fully stopped and running for the gate, calling the horse's name, and Ruth tossed her head and walked toward him with the rolling, unhurried ease of an animal that has decided someone is worth meeting halfway. Emma got out of the truck and stood and watched her brother press his face against the horse's nose and laugh at something, the warm breath. Probably the way Ruth always blew out that long breath, and her face in that moment was not guarded and not armored, and not the face of a 9-year-old calculating the next necessary thing. It was just her face, young and tired, and underneath both something that was beginning carefully, and without announcement, to look like peace. Jack stood beside her. "It's not over," she said. "Cole is still out there." "Yes." "The investigation has months to run." "Yes." She watched Ethan. He had gotten Ruth to lower her head so he could scratch behind her ears, and the horse's eyes had gone half-closed with contentment. "But we're here," Emma said. "Today." "Today," Jack agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, without looking at him with the particular sideways way she offered things that mattered, "Thank you for not closing the barn door." He looked at the side of her face. "Thank you for staying," he said. Emma looked at her brother and her horse and her piece of Wyoming sky, and she breathed in the cold October air, and she did not say anything more because there was nothing more that needed saying. Some things do not announce themselves. They simply take root in the ground you've been standing on quietly while you were busy surviving, and one day you look down and realize that what you thought was just the place you happened to land has become, without your permission and without any ceremony at all, the place you belong. That was what home did. It did not ask. It did not explain itself. It simply kept its door open and waited for you to walk through it. And when you did, when a broken man and a fierce girl and a 6-year-old who believed a horse was his finally came through it together, it closed around them like a hand. Gently, completely, and without letting go.